Throughout the fall and winter of 1991, police searched all over New England for a woman who had disappeared from her home in Maine. Police were unsure if she had run away from home or was the victim of a crime. A year later, investigators found a lead that had been under their noses from the beginning. Portland, Maine is the state's largest city and in past times was its capital. It is a deep water port on the shores of Casca Bay, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean. This explains its role as a major fishing center. Pearl Smith worked as a fish packer. Every day she packed crates of fish to be shipped across the country. It was hard work for which there was little pay. After her workday, she often stopped by the bar near the docks. She was a regular there, as was Bill Bruns, a man 13 years older than her. Bruns was a trucker. His job was to haul fish from Maine to Montreal. The two men had a lot in common. They liked to drink, and they were unlucky in love. Pearl had been divorced 5 times, and Bill's third marriage had just ended. Eventually, they fell in love and married in the summer of 1986. Their relationship seemed very close. Every day they met for lunch at a restaurant on the marina. But on August 13th of 1991, Pearl's daughter, Elaine, called the police to report her mother missing. According to her, she had failed to show up for a family reunion she had been looking forward to. Elaine described her mother as a very loving and caring woman who was a best friend to everyone and was willing to give the last shirt to anyone in need. In addition, she was always there when someone needed her. South Portland detective Linda Barker was brought in to investigate the case. At the Bruns' home, she noticed that none of Pearl's clothes, jewelry, or personal belongings were missing. And her most prized possession, a black Cadillac with Pearl B license plates, was still in the garage. It's worth noting that Pearl loved her Cadillac very much and very rarely went anywhere without it. This was one of the reasons Elaine was very concerned that her mother had gone away but left her Cadillac behind. According to her, the car being left in the garage indicated that Pearl never left the house. Bill Bruns told police that he and his wife had an argument, after which he left to get Chinese food. When he returned home, she was gone. But he said he wasn't worried because she would sometimes leave without explanation. Officers were able to discover that Pearl was indeed often gone from home for 2, 3, 4, even 7 days in a row. She was visiting friends in Old Orchard Beach or relatives. So yes, it happened, and it wasn't unusual. But if the car was still in the garage, how could she have left? Police called airlines, bus services, and cab services. But there was no evidence that Pearl had left town. Then Bill Bruns told police that his wife had probably run off with another man, and the police chief agreed. Sheriff Schwartz did not believe Pearl was missing. He believed she was drunk and may have run off with another man. Schwartz knew Bill personally and believed he was not the kind of man to hurt anyone. And at one time he made this statement to journalist Christina Yang and said that she was an alcoholic, she'd been married 6 or 7 times, she probably eloped with one of her ex-husbands. Then Christina asked him, what about her current husband? Could he be involved? And Schwartz said, no, I've known him for 20 years, it can't be him. Days passed, weeks passed, and the Pearl Brant's family feared they would never see her again. In the port city of Portland, Maine, police continued to search for 48-year-old Pearl Brant's. Prosecutors were suspicious of the woman's husband because he had not reported her missing. Bill's behavior in this case was peculiar. If you came home one day and found that your wife had disappeared without any explanation, What would you do? What would any of us do? File a missing persons report, of course. And Bruns didn't do anything. That Pearl's daughter from a previous marriage went to the police. Also, Sloth stated that she had no doubt that her mom was no longer alive, as she was the kind of person who would go to great lengths just to be able to contact her family. A short time later, Pearl's suitcase was found partially packed on her bed. It had blood spatters on it, which officers believed could have come from either things thrown back at the man, or perhaps someone had struck her with some sort of weapon during the struggle. Officers were then able to determine that in the days before her disappearance, Pearl Bruns had been spending more and more time at her favorite bar, where she told friends that she and Bill were fighting a lot, mostly over money, and that she'd been depressed for a long time. As soon as the news of Pearl's disappearance hit the local media, reports were pouring into the police. One of Pearl's friends said he saw her walking along the pier late at night, but none of those reports were confirmed, and the case went cold. Until 6 weeks later, a hiker walking along the Appalachian Trail, about 320 kilometers from a town in New Hampshire, found Pearl Bruns' purse. It contained all of the woman's identification, jewelry, cosmetics, and money. On the same day, Elaine confirmed that it all belonged to her mother. A search of the area did not turn up anything else, but police have now classified the case as a possible homicide. Also, according to the officer, the purse was lying in plain sight with the woman's personal belongings, driver's license, jewelry, and money inside. In addition, blood spatters were found on the outside of the purse. He's sure it was thrown there on purpose. Someone wanted it found. Meanwhile, Detective Barker returned to the Bruns' house to question Bill. Once inside, she noticed something new. She noticed what she thought was a new carpet. So she asked Bill where he got it, to which the man replied that it was the same carpet that had always been here, and said that he had just shampooed it with carpet shampoo and vacuumed it. Linda was amazed because the carpet was sparkling clean. However, when neighbors were interviewed, it turned out that they had seen Bill Bruns struggling to get the carpet steam cleaner into the house. But why would a man lie to police about shampooing the carpet? A few days afterward, Pearl's daughter came to her stepfather to talk about her suspicions. Elaine said, "You know, Bill, you're the last person to see my mother. You're the only one who might know what happened to her." And the man responded by just sitting there, looking at her and not saying a word. Police used service dogs to search the Bruns' home. These dogs were trained with a special chemical formula called pseudotrope. It mimics the odor of decomposing flesh. The trained dogs lie down when they detect the odor of a dead body. When Dr. Edward David walked his dog, Ray, through the house, the dog walked around the house several times and then headed to the basement where, near the entrance to the subfloor space, he lay down. That meant that was where the dead body was located. The detectives began digging up the area indicated by the dog, confident that the mystery of Pearl Bruns' disappearance had finally been solved. But to their surprise, they found nothing. After months of searching for Pearl Bruns, the only clue to her disappearance was her purse, found on a hiking trail 320 kilometers from her New Hampshire home. A service dog detected the odor of human remains in the basement of Pearl Bruns, but the excavation yielded nothing. It was a major setback for investigators. According to them, the investigation was hard because it went on for a very long time. And at some point they came to the conclusion that they were doing something wrong. But despite all the setbacks and the lack of new evidence, the cops were sure Pearl was dead and were determined to find out exactly what had happened and who the killer was. About this time, there was speculation that Pearl's body might have been dumped at sea, or somewhere along the highway along which Bill Bruns came every week in his truck. He was hauling fish from Maine to Canada. Some of the officers thought it was a great way to dispose of the body, since Bill had a refrigerated truck. According to police, he just needed to stuff the corpse in it and transport it along with the fish, since there was a lot of blood there anyway, and it was unlikely anyone would have noticed anything. But that wasn't the only assumption. Given Bill's connections with the fishermen on the wharf, Pearl could have been taken out to sea and thrown overboard in someone's fishing boat. Meanwhile, Bill Bruns continued to claim that his wife had eloped with her ex-husband. But one of Pearl's friends revealed information refuting this. According to Diana Zier, shortly before her disappearance, the woman told her, "There's one thing I want you to know. If anything happens to me, tell me Bill did it." Diane didn't realize what the conversation was about at first, and then forgot about it altogether. So the police got another search warrant for the Bruns house. This time they used the chemical luminol. When luminol is sprayed on a spot where blood has been cleaned up with water or detergents, it glows or fluoresces. When luminol was used in the Bruns home, the officers were able to see a gruesome sight. Blood splatters were visible on the walls and floor. Bloody footprints led to the bathroom. Areas were visible on the linoleum carpeting where large amounts of blood had been spilled, which was later cleaned up. There was even more blood on the steps leading to the basement, and each step indicated that a bloody object had been dragged down the stairs. There was a large blood stain at the bottom of the stairs. But most disturbing was the blood stain found in the filthy subfloor measuring 12 by 8 meters. There, on the earthen floor, was found the bloody footprint of a human body of one Sperl Bruns's height. It was clear that a large amount of blood had been spilled and cleaned up in the Bruns house, contradicting Bill's version that his wife had simply left. Detective Harriman then presented Bill Bruns with the proof of the luminol work and asked, "What do you think, Bill? Who do you suspect in that case? Who do you think might have been responsible for the murder?" He replied, "I would suspect the husband." Immediately afterward, however, the man continued to insist on his innocence, but when asked to take a lie detector test, he refused. The police didn't know what to do next. They had already excavated the basement floor once before and found nothing. For the next 9 months, the investigation stalled until police learned of a new forensic tool they hoped would lead them to Pearl Bruns' body. Despite 3 separate searches and previous excavations in the Bruns' basement, police were sure that was where the key to Pearl Bruns' disappearance lay. According to the officer, they couldn't dismiss the fact that there might be evidence in the basement, but it was nearly impossible to dig up the entire floor by hand. That's when Detective Harriman learned about a new forensic tool called the GPR. He called Harding C, a local environmental engineering firm that had the equipment. 13 months after Pearl Bruns disappeared, the basement of their home was surveyed with radar. This technology is commonly used to find large metal objects buried in the ground. A GPR device sends high-frequency radio waves into the ground. When the signal hits an obstacle, such as a buried container, the signal is reflected back to the device. But finding the body posed a problem. The human body is apparently made up mostly of water, fatty tissue, flesh, and bone. And according to geophysicist Scott Culkin, it was in this particular study that they became convinced that the human body doesn't transmit radio wave energy very well. In Bruns's basement, radar detected a constant reflection 1 meter below the surface. Preliminary excavation revealed rust-colored oxidized sand. But there was another area where there was no reflection at all. There was an area of white blur on the recording. Nothing was visible, meaning something had absorbed the energy. The researchers didn't know what it was until they dug around and looked at it. When Bill Bruns came home from work, the investigators started digging in his basement again. When they had dug only a few shovels full, a plastic bag buried about 60 centimeters below the surface caught their eye. And it turned out to be a head wrapped in a plastic bag. Investigators then began digging further and found a badly decomposed human body wrapped in 2 large garbage bags and tied with rope and duct tape. The man was wearing a wristwatch with Pearl's name engraved on the dial and pink shoelaces like the ones Pearl had last been seen wearing. The smell of decomposition was overwhelming, and the police went upstairs to meet Bill Bruns one last time. It was about 6 p.m., and the man was sitting upstairs in his home in the kitchen. He was eating spaghetti for dinner when officers came through the door and informed him that he was under arrest for the murder of his wife. Bill responded that murder was a pretty high-profile charge and stated that he had not killed anyone and that they had no evidence. The police officer then informed him about the dead body found in the basement, and after that the man confessed to everything. Bill Bruns was arrested and charged with murder. X-rays showed 3 fractures on the left side of Pearl's face, but the skin was not torn, indicating the blow was delivered with a fist. Prosecutors believe that on August 11th, Bill and Pearl argued over money and a physical fight ensued. He punched her 3 times with such force that blood splattered on the woman's suitcase, on the wall, and on the floor. Lying on the floor, Pearl bled to death. Bill then packed the body in plastic bags and carried it to the basement. Liminal clearly shows the path and where her body lay as he dug the grave. The service dog was right about the body in the basement, and the location it identified was only a few meters away from the actual burial site. Police believe that in an attempt to throw off the investigation, Bill Bruns took Pearl's purse and left it 320 kilometers from the house on a hiking trail in New Hampshire. Bill Bruns eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. After the trial, investigators said that without forensic advances such as luminol, GPR, which were successfully used in this case, they believe it is highly likely that Bill Bruns would have gotten away with murder. Ironically, during the autopsy of Pearl Bruns's body, an anatomy pathologist determined that she had terminal cancer and had no more than 6 months to live. Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments and subscribe to my YouTube channel and other social media.